Okay. So hello, and today for the 7th episode of Dakini Conversations, I'm delighted to welcome Niraj Kumar, who is not only the Joint Secretary of the Indian Ministry of Culture, but also a published Kalachakra scholar and translator. Niraj Kumar is a commentator on Shakta and Buddhist Tantras and has been active with various facets of Himalayan Buddhism for more than a decade. His ongoing work is a 5-volume pentology on Kalachakra Tantra. This is the first comprehensive translation and new commentary of the cryptic Sanskrit text of the 11th century, after several centuries. Kalachakra Tantra was the climax of Nalanda tradition and the last major Buddhist Tantra composed in India. The first volume was published in 2022, and the second volume is in printing and expected to be released within the next few months. Niraj Kumar is also a pan-Asian thinker and writer on geopolitics in Asia, and he was instrumental in organizing the first Asia Peace Forum in New Delhi in 2015. He is also recently one of the key architects of the ongoing exposition of the holy relics of the Lord Buddha, and he divides his time in bureaucracy, scholarship, and sadhana. I first became aware of Niraj Kumar and his work when he asked me to present his work at the Vajrayana conference in Bhutan in 2022, when he was unable to attend. Several people also suggested that I interview him about his excellent work. I then had the good fortune to meet Niraj in India last year for an academic conference, which I was invited to be a keynote speaker. At that time, we exchanged our Kalachakra publications, and I was amazed and stunned by some of the ideas and revelations in the introduction to Niraj Kumar's book. It seemed to me surprising that more people did not know about them. And so one of the main reasons for this interview is to bring some of those ideas out to a larger, more general audience. If there is anyone in the world today who could be called an innovator and a unique thinker on the Kalachakra Tantra, it would be Niraj Kumar. So with that introduction, without further ado, I am very happy to welcome Niraj Kumar. Welcome to Dakini Conversations.
Thank you very much, Adele. And we have been
Namaskar.
planning this interview for last so many months. So I think now it's a opportune time, which has arisen by the grace of Lord Kal Chakra. And we are here going to talk about some of the ideas in the Kal Chakra philosophy as well as my first volume. So thank you very much we know that you have got a huge audience on your Dakini platform, and that is one of the finest website as well as social media platform for understanding, authentic Buddhist Tantra. So there have been several other groups, but Dakini Translation Group is the finest at present in the world. So thank you very much for having me on your podcast.
Oh, well, thank you. And it's also an honor to talk to you. And as I said, your book, Kalachakra Tantra, the first volume, is really astonishing and interesting for so many reasons. And I hope that we can explore some of those reasons today and perhaps in the future as well with a second podcast. So let us start, first of all, with some biographical information about you. Now, in your introduction to your book, you do go into a little bit of detail about your childhood, your influences, and some of your kind of inspirations, if you like. So could you share with us a little bit about that to start with?
I was born in Bihar, the Magda region. And as you know, Magda was the center of Buddhist philosophy for Lord Buddha and all his disciples. So I feel myself very lucky to be born in that blessed land. And during my childhood, because my father was an engineer in irrigation department, so he had transferable jobs. So I have been to many of the places which were linked with the Pala Empire, and they will be visiting like Kahalgaon, Sultanganj, and all these places were important sites for later Buddhism. So my own propensity towards Buddhism arose very early in life. But it was in the year 1990 that I got an opportunity to visit Bodh Gaya. And at that time, there were not, so many people which we find today, and it was still a developing town around the temple. And at that time, I did sit for meditation, and some of the questions which arose under the people tree in the month of, I think, June 1990, that were regarding why their death. Is death necessary for us? And second question was, what is more fundamental to existence? Is it something or is it nothing? And these two questions that led me to a long spiritual odyssey, and that finally culminated into, my Kal Chakra journey after 2014.
Wow. Well, of course, you're extremely fortunate to be from India and to be in those locations without a doubt. Now, you mentioned your interest in Kala Chakra. So, in 2014. So, how did that come about? Particularly, can you give a little bit more detail about that?
Since 2007-8, I was involved with the Himalayan Buddhists. So I was active with many of their conferences, and then this Suarikpa system of medicine. So I have been involved with a lot of, Buddhist lamas and masters. Uh, and I wanted to, I wanted to, learn Buddhist Tantra. I was already doing work on some of the Hindu Tantras, and one of my book, it was on Sri Yantra, that was published in 2012. And suddenly, I think in the month, in 2014, when I discovered the Sanskrit text of Kal Chakra, and I was going through those texts, so I just felt that this is the end of journey. I was in search of this work only. And that certainty arose within me that you have to do it. Rather, I say that the book discovered me, that I have to find expressions through you only.
Wow. Okay. So you have this very personal kind of inspiration and spirit, almost like a spiritual connection with the book, would you say? Do you think that's kind of like a past life type sort of connection there, perhaps?
Uh, it may be possible, because what I feel like, this book is so complex and complicated that without due blessings of the masters, you cannot decipher it. And I feel lucky that the Kal Chakra deity has a number 1125. And I was born exactly at that time, 11:25 hours, on 22nd
Wow.
April. Yeah, so I think there may be some connection that I have to finally find out this book and write a new commentary after a gap of 1,000 years.
Wow. Okay. Well, it is, as I said, extremely interesting commentary, and many new ideas are coming out of it. Now, before we get into the history of Kala Chakra in India and then into Tibet, let's just discuss some of the central concepts of the name Kala Chakra, for example, and some of the things that you discuss in your introduction. So, for example, Kala, as you know, is time, right? So here in your introduction, you mention, time as computational and dissipative. So I wonder if you could just a little bit explain for our audience what you mean by that. Yeah, the two different notions of time.
In Indian astronomical texts, there is a very famous work, that is Surya Siddhant. And this basically, the whole astronomy of Kal Chakra has been derived from Surya Siddhant itself. In the Surya Siddhant, time has been defined as having, two modes. One is computational, and that is Kalnatmak. Kalna is computation. And the other is dissipative, phase change, that is Kalatmak. So what happens when, like, we measure time, it is computational. But in flow of time, everything also dissipates. There is phase change going on, and everything. It may be the physical universe, it may be the biological universe, or I term the third universe as the symbolic universe, like linguistics, semiotics, and all these, images. So though everywhere we find that in flow of time, there is going to be dissipation. That means this thermodynamic principle of entropy, it is not only in the physical universe, but it is also in the biological and symbolic universe.
Yes.
That occurs because of dissipative nature of time, because in time there is also phase change going on.
Yes, exactly. Now, your introduction, you do go into some detail about this, but let us turn now to how the breath and time is connected in the Kala chakra. Again, you do mention this in your introduction. So you're talking about the three realms, the outer, the inner, and the other, which is very famous and well known amongst those who are familiar with Kala chakra, right? But then how the breath connects with those different three realms, and maybe you can speak a little bit about that with the prana, pravaha, and sukshma, and the unity of these, and how that is connected with full awakening, just on a very general level for the audience.
So see, what Kal Chakra was trying to find out, that in flow of time, in course of time, there is dissipation in any realm. It may be physical, biological, or symbolic. Okay. And that dissipation is taking place through a common universal algorithmic process. That algorithmic process is same. It may be within our inner working or outer universe or symbolic universe. Now, that that also has a mathematical nature. This is interesting for them. They are not only trying to find out that universal algorithm, but that is also mathematical in nature. Now we come to universal algorithm and how this dissipation takes place. So see, any system can be divided into two halves. We know in Tantra, like having the deity, they have Kapal. Kapal is half skull. So skull is nothing but it is hemisphere. That is half, half of the sphere. So any system can be divided into two halves, and each half, is a mirror image of each other, and one part, right side is male, left side is female. So they also gender the two halves. Any system, it may be linguistics, it may be, physical world, like a circle of zodiac signs, or it may be our inner world, like we have two halves. So my right side is masculine in nature, my left side is feminine in nature. You take an example of circle and we can understand it. Now what happens? Within those halves, there are 5 mandalas, which is causing the change. 5 mandalas, and these mandalas are based on earth, water, fire, wind, and space nature. So even on right side, those 5 mandalas are flowing. On left side, those 5 mandalas are flowing. Now, these mandalas, like in case of physical universe, these mandalas are flowing as pravaha, which leads all the celestial objects to, flow incessantly. What we say gravitational force. And within biological inner working, these mandalas are working, are part of the prana wind. And in the symbolic, it is sukshma, but rather I will say bhava. So how these 5 mandalas are working? On right side, that is male side, it is a sequence of generation. Okay, so from it is and on the left side, it is a sequence of destruction. So these kind of stipulations have been made for all kind of system. Now, whenever there is phase change, say 5 mandalas of wind are flowing on this side, and like our nostril breathing, you see there is phase change from right to left nostril and left to right nostril. So whenever there is phase change, so at the center, in the middle, madhyama, there is no phase change. So that madhyama itself is beyond, and that there this deficit occurs, deficit of time. And that deficit of time causes dissipation. So the whole formulation is like any system can be divided into two halves, and there are mandalas of flow on both sides. And whenever there is phase transition, at the center there is deficit of time, and that will cause dissipation. whenever there is phase change, that is breathing. So that means if there is phase change in physical universe, that means there also this breathing is taking place.
Yes.
If there is phase change within linguistic vowels and consonants, that means breathing is taking place there also. So
Okay.
breathing is the mode by which dissipation in course of time takes place. And therefore they made everything, breathing and alive, from the atoms to the alphabets.
Yes, I mean, this part of your introduction is fascinating and worthy of a whole discussion in itself. But in terms of the realms and how the breath connects with those different realms, obviously, it's very important people read that in your book, I think. Now, moving on to something else which is connected with the breath, obviously, is death and destruction, as you mentioned. Now, in your book, you say it's a catastrophic collapse of the system, right? The system being, I guess the physical bio machine, or as you term it. Now we'll go into the machine-like nature of things a little bit later, but now you talk about this collapse of the system as being death, but how you can cheat death, which you mention in the book as well, cheating death, and how the great mother Vishvamata, how she controls death and awakening. Now, perhaps you can say a little bit about that, about, how is it possible to cheat death, as you say, and how is that connected into sort of the great mother and the awakening, if you like, as it's presented in the Kala Chakra Tantra?
In fact, in my second volume, there's a long section on death itself. And we have all the way of how to cheat death. So first, I didn't want to disclose that, but finally, I've decided, and in the second volume, one can go through that section. It's quite elaborate. But now coming to the earlier discussion, like what I was saying, at the Madhyama, there is no phase change and deficit takes place. So say, if you process poison, it becomes medicine. So if you process Madhyama and then inject the whole system with that Madhyama, then that whole body, that becomes vaccinated against vagaries of time. So this was their formulation. What we are talking about, how we move from death to deathlessness. So you have to first, tame Madhyama. So, and within our human body, what is that Madhyama? That is by nostril breathing. So the Kal Chakra says that in a day we take 21,600 breaths. Again, this is mathematical, because in a circle we have got 360 degrees. Each degree has 60 minutes. Then when you multiply it, 21,600 minutes. Look, chakra is circle. So Kal Chakra, it is circle of time. So everything is formulated around that 21,600 minutes. Now, in 21,600 breaths per day, what happens? We have inner zodiacs of the prana flowing inside. That also moves inside. So there are 12 zodiacs. So in each zodiac, you have got 1,800 breaths. But then there is transition of breath from right to left after each zodiac. So within a whole day, we have 12 zodiac. That means we have 12 transition, and during each transition, 56 and a quarter breath. That is accumulated at deficit in the Madhyama. So in a day, we accumulate 675 breath, and in 100 years of lifespan, that comes out to be 1125 days. You see, so if you process that Madhyama, and it is 1125 days, if you convert by 360 days, so it becomes 3 years and 3 fortnights. And we all know that is a very strong tradition in Himalayan Buddhism to go into retreat for 3 years and 3 fortnights. So that also comes from the Kal Chakra. So if one can, just control the Madhyama and inject one's body by that processed Madhyama, then your body becomes anti-aging. You have a 16-year-old body, and your hairs don't gray, hairs don't fall. So these are written in the text.
Yes, and we see that a little bit in the sort of, which is not Kala Chakra, but the Tukdam, when great practitioners die, certainly in the Tibetan or Himalayan Buddhist traditions, we see that, they bring the breath into the central channel, leave it there. And there are, I know some eyewitness who've seen this, where the body shrinks to the size of a baby. And, someone who is maybe 80 years old, their face also becomes like a baby's face, glowing and youthful. So there's something that they're doing there when they bring that energy, the life force, into the central channel, right? So anyway, that's just a by and by. Now let's go on to because obviously there's so much we can talk about here, but let's move on to the mathematics then of Kala Chakra. So in your introduction, you mentioned the numbers, the kind of the machine-like almost nature that you say there is an infatuation with machines. And particularly in the attached commentary by Jayarata, which you mentioned, that the goal of Kala Chakra is to have a machine-like personality where there is a cessation of the flow of karma. Machines do not expect fruits from their work. So that's a direct quote from your book. Now, perhaps you could say a little bit about that, this machine, this infatuation with machines. You term it, right, in the book, your book.
In fact, in the book, I have also written that if the Kala Chakra composer would have been alive today, he would not have postulated about the chakras, wheels for meditation, rather than chips for meditation, because chip is the highest technology for our 21st century. So what is their infatuation? Because we just discussed that in Kala Chakra, they say that the universe is panpsychic. Everything is breathing, and therefore it is conscious. But on the other hand, they also say that everything has machine-like system, and it is bound by Pratitya Samutpat. So here Buddhist philosophy comes. So it may be sun. Sun is also moving around 12 zodiacs, and each zodiac corresponds to one of the link of the Pratitya Samutpat. It may be prana. It is also, flowing around that 12 inner zodiacs, and again it is linked with Pratitya Samutpat. So just like a system where, one thing depends upon another thing. So similarly, Pratitya Samutpat is ubiquitous in 3 realms. That is clear instructions in the Kala Chakra. But what happens that like machines, when they, and you see at that time when Kala Chakra was composed during 10th, 11th century, the highest machine was this, taking out sugarcane juice. Okay, so that milling. So that was, and that was based on the chakras, wheels after wheels, So therefore, if we see suddenly in Kala Chakra, they are talking about rasa, juices. They are not talking about seeds. Earlier tantras are talking about seeds. Okay, you have seeds of different elements. But here they are talking about juice, ras. And then finally they are talking about, how we are going to have that ultimate rasa, sant rasa also, the rasa of peace. So this rasa concept is based again on machine. So their whole metaphor was based on that, sugarcane milling machines. And they are talking that there, even though in 3 words, which we were discussing, there are pravah, pran, and bhav flowing in 10 different mandalas. But above that, there is karmavat, karma wind. Okay. So the text talks karmavat hata, means destroy the karma wind. So what is nirvana? When you are working like machine, machine does not expect the fruit of its action. So this is what they are writing, that ultimately when when the Dakini blesses you, there is karmavat hata. And that karmavat hata is not only within our body. It can be, in the physical universe also, and then one Mahayuga ends and another Mahayuga will arise. And the Dakini is again, it is a dual force. Dakini has seizure in her hands. So she has a seizure and she has a needle. Needle is to puncture, like you vaccinate. You vaccinate with, against time. So that
Yes.
Dakini can do. And she has a seizure. So by seizure, she can cut the knot of sansar. And by seizure, she can also cut the knot of your life, prana. So
Right.
the Dakini, well, like finally the Kal Chakra propitiates in the Vimal Prabha commentary. You see in the introduction section, it has been they say you have to first propitiate the yoginis, and the great Dakini is beyond all the things. And interestingly, great Dakini has been given a mathematical number also in the text. It is number 384.
Yes, I know. It's fascinating. Your introduction about the numbers, and there's quite a lot of that in there in your introduction. Again, way too much to discuss here, but definitely worth reading in terms of the numbers and the machine-like nature of the the tantrika. The tantric practitioner ideally would be like a machine who is just basically working non-stop for the Buddha Dharma without any expectation of reward, right? I agree with that. That's very much, I think, how it should feel and be. Yeah. So now just moving on to the sort of the mathematics connection before we go on to the origin of Kala Chakra, the composition of the text in India and so on. So you mentioned there's this Aryabhata and his connection to the Kala Chakra astronomy and numbering. Now, you say now many people may not be aware who this is, right? So myself included. So that was really interesting to read about. Now, you said he wrote his magnum opus at 23 years old, and he was the one whose work you feel is very much, connected to what's written in the Kala Chakra Tantra. So maybe can you talk about him a little bit for the people who are not aware of who he is?
See, Aryabhatta was one of the greatest mathematicians of all time. So he was from 5th, 6th century, and many people say that he was based in Nalanda, and he had certain observations, this observatory near present Patna. So it is Aryabhatta who, put the like period of Kali Yuga. He calculated the Kali Yuga period, and that is what is being followed in India. Then he also redacted Surya Siddhant during his time, and he wrote a very famous work, Aryabhatiya. So there he gave the value of pi also, and some people claim that he came up with the concept of decimal notations and these things. But Aryabhatta was one of the greatest mathematician as astronomer, and one can say that jewel of Nalanda tradition. But the Kal Chakra Tantra, that came almost 400, 500 years after Aryabhatta. But the mathematics with Kal Chakra astronomy followed, that is based on Aryabhatiya.
Yes, you mentioned in your introduction there's these sort of very much clear connections between his work and what's in the Kala Chakra Tantra, and again that's and consciousness as well. So in terms of like you mentioned, this 21,600 Kala in a circle connected to the 21,600 breaths and the Earth's rotation. So that a lot of that again you mentioned in your introduction and how it's connected to his work. So let's move on now to a little bit of history regarding, let's look at first now about the composition of the Kala Chakra Tantra. Now, again, a lot of people don't maybe really know about this other than maybe some scholars, but you go into quite a bit of detail in your introduction about the composition of the text, when it was, and the lineages that came from that, that then went into Tibet. Now, you mentioned, obviously, Adi Buddha preached it to King Suchandra of Shambhala. That's the historical sort of tale, if you like, of the origin of the Kala Chakra, the teaching. But as for the text itself, you mentioned Jason Taranata's account of its arrival in India with the Pala king, Mahipala, in the 10th century, right?
Yeah, 11th century.
Sorry? In the
11th century.
11th century, sorry, yeah. So, and you mentioned that you know, you go through some analysis of the timing and when it was composed, and you conclude it was 1027 CE. So with the Vimalaprabha commentary, the stainless light commentary, that coming closely after in 1040 CE.
Yeah.
So perhaps you could say just a little bit about that, you know, and you know, certainly you know, the timing of it, for example. So, you know, when it was written and when it was actually taught are quite different, right? They're not the same. Yeah.
See, like though the followers of the Kalchakra tradition, so many of the masters also say that it was revealed by Lord Buddha himself at Dhankatak.
Yeah.
During that third turning of wheel. But if one go through the text, so there you find mention of name, city, Baghdad. Now, Baghdad was founded in 8th century, 762 AD. So naturally, this could not have been, you know, told by Lord Buddha, Sakyamuni Buddha during his time. Now, when you start analyzing different historical narratives in the text or other things and different ideas, then you find that this could not have been written before 10th century. Like there is mention of in the 5th chapter, there are 5 chapters in this Kalchakra Tantra. So the 5th is the Gyan Patal. There is mention about the Ras Hridaya Tantram. Ras Hridaya Tantra. So this was an alchemy text, and this was written somewhere around 9th, 10th century. So naturally, if this Kalchakra text is citing Ras Hridaya Tantram, so this was composed only after that. Now, the text itself is mentioning when it was being composed. So in the there are 5 chapters that we were discussing. The first chapter is a Lok Dhatu Patal. It is on the you know, physical universe, describing the whole Chakraval and astronomical sections. So on the Sloka 27, it mentions Vahno Kha Abdho Vimisrang Prabho Mukh Gatang Malech Varsang Prasiddhang. So I will just decode it. Vahno, here this Kal Chakra is completely a coded text, and they are following the Bhut Sankhya numeral system of like Indian astronomical text. And how this is to be read, so we will just decode it. Vahni is fire. So one and fire, there are fire, you know, the numerical notation for fire in Indian astronomical text is 3. Okay. And then Kha is a space. So its notation is 0. And Abdo is ocean. It stands for number 4. So when you read it, it becomes Vahno Kha Abdo 304. Now it had to be read in the reverse sequence. Then it becomes 403. So this is the fourth Sankhya reading, which you have to follow while going through this Kal Chakra text. So when you add, Vimisrang means adding. When you add the 403 years with the famous, Prasiddhang, famous, well-known Malech Varsang, and Malech is here Islam. So famous Malech Varsang is Hijri, you know, the first year of the Hijri calendar. If you add 622 plus 403, you come to 1025 AD. But then there are other factors, and some astronomers like O'Harsey and Edward Henning, they have calculated that there was an error of 2 years between North Indian and South Indian tradition. So it comes out to be 1027 AD.
Yes.
So it is 1027 AD when this text, you know, the composition of this text started. This is well mentioned in this text itself. So we are clear that this text was not composed, this discourse was given by Lord Buddha himself. Okay, so this was written
down
early 11th century.
I think that's the thing, is that so the mythology, if you like, is that the Lord Buddha you know, taught it, as you said, and also that it was or the Adi Buddha preached it to King Suchandra of Shambhala, right? But the actual text itself was not written down sort of until the 11th century. That's very interesting. And in your introduction, you go into a lot of detail about how you came to that date. So again, that's very worth reading for people who are interested in that. Now, let's go on to now a little bit more about the lineage of Kalachakra in India. You mentioned a bit later on in the book, Tilopa and Naropa in the Kalachakra transmission in India. So just very briefly, there are two main transmissions into Tibet from India. That's the Ra and the Dro transmission, which we'll get onto a little bit later. Now, you say, and obviously there's also Gijjo and other lineages now, but you mentioned that these all kind of go back and can trace their lineage back to Naropa, which is very interesting because, as we'll discuss a bit later as well, you know, Naropa, as you know, was one of the main Kagyu forefathers in the Kagyu lineages. And, you know, not so many people associate the Kagyu or Naropa with Kalachakra, but you clearly say, you know, obviously Naropa is very important in the Kalachakra transmission. So again, could you say maybe a little bit about the Naropa transmission and his role in the Kalachakra transmission?
Once, we are clear that when this text was composed, so we are clear that it was composed after during early 11th century. Now, we are also clear where it was composed, because I have done detailed analysis that the flora and fauna it is mentioning, the culture it is mentioning. So all these are clearly from India, and Shambhala is not something in the Arctic or somewhere else. Because if the text is talking about laddu and puri, you know, these kind of things, so these are not the staple diets of in the Arctic region. So now once we are clear that it was composed, written in India and during this period, so at that time, who was the greatest authority, Buddhist master thinker in India? Apart from that, we know then it was Naropa. Apart from that, if you see all the 17 lineages mentioned by this Jonang historian Thuje Sundu in 13th century, all the 17 lineages in one way or another is derived from Naropa itself. So major two also derived from Naropa. But apart from that, if you see Sami Lochawa tradition, again that comes from Naropa. So Abhyakar Gupta and Abhyagar Gupta and all the traditions that is derived from Naropa. So now, Naropa is the greatest scholar of that time when it was being composed. All the traditions are derived from Naropa, and Naropa's one of the name was also Yasobhadra. So if the text was composed by abridged version, what people say, abridged version was done by Manjushri Yasa. So Yasobhadra was another name of Naropa. And Naropa had different names. If you see even in Tanjore, so he's writing with different names. So why can't that Yasa be Naropa? But I have finally, and you see, Tilopa Naropa also worked on Sadhana Yoga, six-folded yoga. And Kalachakra has again Sadhana Yoga, and it's more or less very similar to the Sadhana Yoga of Tilopa Naropa. And they have, you know, he had developed it further. So the whole base is again Tilopa Naropa's six-fold yoga. Naropa is the master from whom all different lineages can be, you know, found. So therefore, there is no doubt it was Naropa who composed the text.
Yeah, I mean, this is absolutely fascinating. When I read this, you know, that you know, you assert that Naropa would have composed the root text, the Kalachakra root text, right? Now, this is obviously.
And I must add here, Naropa has another name as Nadpad.
Yes.
Okay, someone who holds the, you know, status of Nad. And Nad is the highest, you know, when in the end of the text after realization, it is said like there are, you know, 16-fold body of the Kal Chakra. Then 16th is Nada. So there is only one, you know, Mahasiddha who is known as Nadpad, that was Naropa. So the whole Kal Chakra realized master. So that name itself was given to Naropa.
Yeah, I mean, this is really fascinating because not a lot of people will necessarily, well, certainly outside the academic realm, would associate Naropa with Kalachakra. And I think that's really important. And, original aspect of your book and your introduction is that you make that very clear association and why. Now, before we go on to how then the Indian Mahasiddhas and the transmissions came into Tibet, let's just look at the actual copies of the Kalachakra text itself that are extant. Now, you mentioned in your book the oldest copy is a palm leaf one, which is in the British Library now. And there is one that was found in Drepung Monastery, which is a Gelugpa monastery, which was dated in the 13th century, but that was found only in 2009. Now, this text you say mentions Ogyampa, who is a teacher of the third Karmapa, Rangjung Dorje. Now, I do want to discuss, obviously, Rangjung Dorje, the third Karmapa, and Ogyampa in a bit more detail as well. But first of all, let's discuss the copies of the actual text that are available of the root Tantra, the text itself.
So the manuscript on which I work, that is a Cambridge manuscript, that is of 1446, 1447. And this was, one former president of Asiatic Society, Vishwanath Banerjee. So he started working on this text when he was in Germany during 1950. So he did PhD on one section of the book in German language. And finally, Asiatic Society, after collating with other Tibetan, texts, they published this Cambridge manuscript in 1985. And so I worked with this Cambridge manuscript. But while working, then I saw one Twitter post by British Library that they have got an older text which they found in northeast India during late 13th century. So that puts this British Library text manuscript at the oldest. But when we come to the Vimal Prabha commentary, so we have got a Vimal Prabha commentary kept with our Asiatic Society, and that I have dated to 1090s, though many scholars have dated it to 1117 AD. So in a way, the text and the commentary which were written in 1040 AD, so we have got the manuscripts available from, written within 60 years. So that is we have got authentic manuscript in a way, because not much corruption would have taken place in the text.
Wow. Well, has the Indian government or anyone approached the British Library to get this oldest Kalachakra root text back to India? I mean, and is it available for viewing in the British Library? I mean, do they have it on public show there that people can go and see it?
No, it is still not available. It is being digitalized, and I tried to, get a copy or at least copy of the colophon, but I tried my best for 6-7 months. I could not. But I think it's a good idea that we can get that text back to India, and it can be, a huge thing for Buddhist community in India.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, how did it get into the British Library's hands anyway? Do you know? Do you know the history of how it went into Britain?
I don't know, because this was the Twitter post from where I came to know that they have got another old text, old manuscript. Yes.
Okay, so we were talking about the lineages of Kalachakra in India and how pretty much all of them go back to the Mahasiddha, Indian Mahasiddha Naropa. And two of the most important transmissions that you mention are from the Ra and Drolat Sawa, and also Gijo. Now, you mentioned that there was this big meeting as well of translators in Tibet in 1076 with the Guj king, Zede. And this also had some impact in the Kalachakra being translated into Tibetan. So perhaps you could talk a little bit about some of those lineages. For example, there is the Kashmiri Pandita Somanatha, the Nepalese scholar
Samant
Sri. And then you have, of course, there are 17 to 20 lineages, right? But perhaps we can just talk about sort of the main ones, like the Ra and the Dro lineages, and you know, how they came into Tibet.
Initially, we have to start from Naropa itself.
That's great.
And as we know, during Naropa time, there were many Tibetan pilgrims visiting Naropa, and Vikramshila also. So one of them was Nakso. So when Nakso came, and he was the person, who accompanied back Dipankar Atish to Tibet. So at that time, Nakso meets Naropa. So now we are certain that Naropa was alive when Dipankar Atish was going to Tibet. Okay. And when Dipankar was staying in Nepal, at that time he came to know that Naropa is no more. And after that, we all know that Marpa came back to India to meet Naropa, but he had already left the world. So there is no doubt that Naropa was the greatest, philosopher, master, Siddha of his time. And many people think that Dipankar Atish had nothing to do with Kal Chakra. But it's not true. The transmission of Kal Chakra came to Dipankar Atish also from Naropa. Therefore, I'm, predating Somnath and other people directly to Dipankar Atish. And I'm discussing in my book also that, in fact, Dipankar Atish had mentioned about some of the, Kal Chakra. He had discussed in one of his book, Bodhi Mark Pradeep Panchika Naam. So he had discussed certain slokas of the Kal Chakra Tantra. So Dipankar Atish was already aware, and it is Dipankar himself who is taking Kal Chakra to Tibet, but he did not popularize that. Though there were recipients of the Kal Chakra transmission from Dipankar Atish, and I have been pointed to Mahamudra Chenpo, the person who founded Bodong Monastery in 1049 AD. And at that time, we know that Dipankar Atish was already alive. And in Kal Chakra, we talk about Mahamudra, the Great Seal. So his name itself is Mahamudra Chenpo. And why I'm saying, because if you see the whole Tibetan history of Kal Chakra, the Bodong Monastery remains the center. It may be Vibhuti Chandra visiting, it may be in 15th century Van Ratna visiting, it may be Orgyenpa visiting, all the great Kal Chakra masters from Tibet, or it may be from India who are going thereafter, they are visiting Bodong Monastery. Though what I have discussed in book, that the first transmission of Kal Chakra actually took place through Naropa to Dipankar Atish to Mahamudra Chenpo in Bodong. Now we come to the two major traditions. So we know Somnath tradition because he came from Kashmir. He could not meet Naropa, but he met Naropa's disciples. And then Somnath go to Tibet, and he had his disciple Lochawa. Another tradition was that again from Naropa's disciple, it go to Samant Sri in Nepal, and from there we have Rod tradition. Third, very important tradition, which became popular in Mongol court, that was of Anupam Rakshita. So, Sakya Sri Bhadrav, as we know, when Vikramshila was ransacked by the Islamic forces, then many of the masters, either they, they fled to Nepal or they fled to Orissa side. So Sakya Sri Bhadra, he again was a Kashmiri master, and he was the abbot of Vikramshila Monastery. He fled to Nepal with Vibhuti Chandra and Dansila, his disciples. So when Sakya Sri Bhadra was in Nepal, at that time, Sakya Pandita, the Tibetan master, or what to say, the first Tibetan master who went to Mongol court. So Sakya Pandita, he came to Sakya Sri, and he learned some of the Kal Chakra things, because Sakya Sri was Sakya Sri was a great Kal Chakra master. Now, this line, this is different than Ra and do tradition, because it is Anupam Rakshita Sadhu Putra tradition coming to Sakyasri to we have Sakya Pandita, and then after to Pakpa, and so that is a different, and that got into Sakya sect. Okay, so we have got these kind of different tradition.
Yeah.
Another important tradition, that was of Sami Lochawa.
Sami, yeah,
He's
Sami
a very
Lotsawa,
interesting
yeah.
character. Sami Lochawa, because he was a prince monk from Chichia Empire. And Chichia, it was in the Gansu corridor region. And he's coming to India. And at that time, what happened when some of the Tibetans were coming, and they were asked to get teachings of the Tantra from Sami Lochawa. Then they complained, no, we have come here to learn from Avyagarkup, not from Sami Lochawa. But such a great personality Sami was that he became the only foreigner abbot of Bodh Gaya temple. And I'm talking about 11th, 12th century. So Sami Lochawa, so if you see almost the 3 different lineages, that start from Sami Lochawa.
Yes, exactly.
But again, Sami and Avyakarkup, they are all linked to Naropa only.
All linked to
Naropa.
So you mentioned the Bodh Gaya temple. He was the first, the foreign abbot of that, did you say?
Yes.
The Bodh Gaya temple, as in the Mahabodhi temple.
Mahabodhi temple, yeah.
Wow. Well, as I've written about a little bit myself with the translation of Taranata's 100 Blazing Lights, he mentions 17 main lineages. The Sami Lotsawa is in there. Now, one of the interesting things Edward Henning also brought out in his research was how the Sami Lotsawa lineage is kind of came down into the Kagyu, in particular the Karma Kagyu, and this has been lost somewhat because, the main emphasis has been on Ra and Dro particularly. But that's also quite interesting that lineage, which was predominantly within the Karma Kagyu, seems to have become lost in some way. Now, just let's talk now about the third Karmapa and Ogyempa, because in a way, they, as you pinpoint in your book, they are very important figures in the transmission of Kala Chakra into Tibet, right? Now, you mention, for example, that obviously the third Karmapa is the student of Ogyempa and an important master in his own right, Rangjung Dorje. So he wrote this book on Kala Chakra astronomy in Tibet, and it's called Sikun Dupa in 1318. And then you mentioned his student, the Karmapa student, Yungten Dorje Pel, creates the Sakya calendar. And then, based on the third Karmapa's work on the astronomy of Kala Chakra, the Serpu calendar was created, which is obviously very influential in Tibet, even now, particularly within the Karma Kagyu. So perhaps you can say a little bit about that, because again, I've tried to bring this out a little bit in my own research about the strong history of Kala Chakra with the Karmapas and also in the Nyingma. But perhaps you can talk a little bit about that, the third Karmapa and Ogyempa.
Ogyempa was also a Drukpa monk. So like Drukpas or Kagyu, all are finally connected to Naropa himself.
Indeed.
So it was Ogyempa. People don't know that Ogyempa was basically Odianpa. So Orgyen is Tibetan name for Odian. So it is said that he wrote one, travel guide to Odian. He had visited the place. And he is credited with starting this Tulku reincarnation system, which is being followed in Tibet these days. So Ogyempa had a vision of the Kal Chakra when he was there in Bodong Monastery. So Ogyempa had already visited, Odian and these places. But finally, he had this, initiation. I will say rather than vision, he was initiated into Kal Chakra tradition at Bodong Monastery. And he's very close to the second Karmapa in the Kublai Khan court. And when Kublai Khan, when he died, so for this funerary ritual, the Kal Chakra text was printed, woodblock printing was done by the queen and the prince. So that was commissioned to Ogyempa. So that woodblock printing with Orgenpa name that has been discovered in Drepung Monastery in this century. So in
Well,
a way,
yeah.
that was the influence of Orgenpa on Kublai Khan court. And that was the influence of Kal Chakra on Kublai Khan court. Because if we see, even
Mm,
Sakya Pandita, he's talking about Sambala in some of his writings.
mm,
And then Pakpa is sending two of the Sakya monks to Nepal and who said, we have got Kal Chakra text from central India. And I'm talking about 13th century,
mm.
late 13th century. So that way, Mongol court is slowly getting, engrossed with the Kal Chakra text. And
Yeah.
Orgenpa took it to the peak. And then Orgenpa transmits to the to third Karmapa Rangjung Tolji, whom he also recognized as the reincarnation of second Karmapa. And Rangjung Dolji, third Karmapa, can be considered as the first, original Tibetan thinker on Kal Chakra.
Yes, exactly. And I think the work that you mentioned, which is this Tibetan, the first, if you like, text in Tibetan on Kala Chakra astronomy is the Tsikun Dupa. And that was in 1318. So obviously that's a very important text, but also a kind of time, if you like, in Tibet when this text in Tibetan on the Kala Chakra astronomy was written. And then you also have Golotsawa Shunupel. You mentioned this, who's also a very important Tibetan Buddhist writer and master, who was the author of the Blue Annals, right? And he wrote, and he also wrote a text on Kala Chakra astronomy. But also, you say he was the last to receive the Kala Chakra teachings from the Indian master Vanaratna. So yeah, I wonder if you could talk a little bit then about Golotsawa Shunupel and his Kala Chakra commentary.
As we know, like you were telling that the Vanaratna was the last Indian master who went to Tibet. He went thrice, and he was the teacher of this Golotsawa Shunupel, who wrote this Blue Annals that was translated by Rorik in the last century. So I'm not studied his commentary on Kal Chakra, but we know for sure that Vanaratna did lot of translation of the Kal Chakra text, and we find the mention in the Tibetan collections. But at the time when Vanaratna was visiting Tibet, by that time Kal Chakra had already, gained lot of prominence in Tibet. And it was because of the work of Dolpopa, the Jonang master, and Bhutan. So Bhutan from Salu Monastery. So what is happening that Dolpopa was, he was very charismatic also, very popular and great scholar also, and he may be considered to be the only Tibetan master who took on even Indian Acharya, and he criticized, I think, Acharya Haribhadra. So that is the only case of any Tibetan master, directly taking on means Indian Mahapandit itself. So at the time when Vanaratna was there in Tibet, so by that time already Tibetan traditions, no, Tibetan own scholarship had started.
Yes.
That was in the formative stage, called say Bhutan and Dolpopa. And Dolpopa is one of the disciple. And what they did, both of them, they synthesized the two tradition. The Somnath one and Sakyasri one. So they like synthesized the two tradition. And thereafter, it was transmitted to the Geluk New or Geluk sect, which came around 1409 AD. So what is happening that like Tsongkhapa, who was the founder of the Geluk sect, he himself was taught Kal Chakra by one of the Junang masters, and he was disciple of Dolpopa. And then from Tsongkhapa onwards, Kal Chakra was a serious things for the Geluks also, but basically it was the Panchen Lamas who picked up the
Yes.
Kalchakra.
We'll get onto that in a bit later, but let's just stop here around this time because with the Jonang transmitting the Kalachakra to the Gelug, like you say, Tsongkhapa, obviously historically now more and more is being revealed that the Gelugpas with the Mongolian invasion, sacked and ransacked and stole and destroyed various monasteries, in particularly the Jonang and the Kagyu, as the 17th Karmapa was recently talking about as well. And so the Jonang in particular, suffered tremendously from that kind of ransacking or sort of takeover. Many of their texts were stolen and sealed up and only recently discovered in places like Drepur. So it's kind of interesting in a way, and ironic, if you like, that the people who transmitted the Kalachakra to Tsongkhapa were then actually kind of totally suppressed and had that whole tradition, if you like, taken away from them or hijacked off them. And even today, I mean, I was told when I was translating Taranata's text on Kalachakra by Jonang people that the Gelugpas still get their teaching and transmission of the Kalachakra from the Jonangs because they don't hold the lineage of the completion stage, the 6 yogas of Kalachakra, right? And so they still have to get that sort of transmission from the Jonang. Now, you talk about the sort of the Dalai Lama and the Kalachakra later on in your book, and we'll get onto that. But let's before we do that, let's talk about Mipam as well, because Mipam Namgyal Gyatso, a Bhutanese 19th century Nyingma master, who I also mentioned in an article about the Nyingma and Kalachakra. He also wrote a work on Kalachakra. So perhaps you could also talk a little bit about that, about Mipam.
I have gone through his commentaries, which has been like posted by International Kalachakra Network,
Yes.
both volumes. So that is in English, and it's like I won't say it's a verse by verse commentary, which like Pundit tried, or my own ambition is much bigger. So it's a good book, but it's not like very eclectic, mixed kind of thing. So or you don't have that kind of flow, like if you want to understand step by step. So that is not Mipam. And Mipam actually he belonged to Kham region of Tibet, but
Yes.
all his works were published from Bhutan.
Right. So he's actually Tibetan, right? Not
Yes.
Bhutanese.
Not Bhutan.
But he's very important, I guess, in Bhutan because they followed him and in the Nyingma particularly.
Yeah, yeah.
But oh, that's interesting to know. So you've written quite a bit on Mipam then, and that's available on the International Kalachakra Network website, is it? You mentioned?
Yes. Yes.
Great. Okay, now, so that's kind of like a background then. So in terms of the sort of main lineages that have survived to this day, coming through India into Tibet, that would be the Ra and the Dro Lotsawa, right? So now, before we get onto this, how Kalachakra is transmitted in contemporary, in the 20th century and Tibet in the 19th century as well, you did mention that the dating of the introduction of Kalachakra in Tibet as 1027 was had some glaring errors in it, and even some hilarious claims. So basically, you do a review of the literature, and you mentioned that this was said that it was introduced into Tibet in 1027. So perhaps you could just say a little bit about that. So the sort of errors there. And why?
When the text itself says that it was written, the writing started from 1027 AD, then how can it be introduced in Tibet in 1027 AD?
Right.
Second, Al-Biruni was here in India, and he is writing Kitabe Hind, and he discussing almost a dozen calendars prevalent in India, and some of the calendars were based on some of the texts of late 10th century. But he did not talk about any Kalchakra calendar. So my own interpretation is that by the time this text was written by Al-Biruni, Kalchakra Tantra text was not composed. And you see, Kalchakra Tantra text is being written from 1027. Al-Biruni writes his work in 1031. So, and if even to decode the text, it had taken 10 years of time. So I think it would have been written, and that too in Sraddhara meter in a year or two. So that might have taken more than 10, 12 years.
So why do you think that this idea of it being introduced in 1027 in Tibet, why did that become so prevalent? Why did that become so, what was the kind of source of that?
The source was after 5th Dalai Lama, the Desi Sangye Gyatso. So, he spread this like a story because during his time, there is 60-year cycle, Jupiter cycle, Samvatsar cycle. So during his time, this another new cycle started. So Desi Gyatso, then he applied it retrospectively, and because in 1027 AD, new Jupiter cycle had started, so they are saying that was introduced in 1027, but it's not correct because that cycle is from 1027 to 1087. So that was introduced in that cycle, which I have been discussing about that great conference of great translators in Guge in 1076. So that was introduced between 1027 and 1087. But not
well,
that
again,
1027.
I mean, this is a very interesting revelation in your book, and an important one as well. Now, let's move on to more contemporary Kalachakra then, because in many people's eyes, the Kalachakra, particularly as it's practiced in the last sort of 50, 60, 70 years, is a kind of a Gelugpa, predominantly, with the empowerments of the 14th Dalai Lama. And yet, as scholars know, this is not representative at all of, the history of Kalachakra in India and Tibet. But why and how has that come about? This idea that the Gelugpas, the Dalai Lamas, they kind of own Kalachakra almost, right? And that no other lineage now seems to dare touch it, or at least not very publicly, right? So there's a reason for that, I think, and you mentioned some of this, of course, in your book about how these huge Kalachakra empowerments started with the Panchen Lama and the Chinese Communist government, who, he fled from Tibet, right, to flee from the Ganden government, the Gelugpas there. And he then started doing that with the Chinese government sort of alongside him. And then how the Dalai Lama themselves started to use this ritual for mass empowerment, and if you like, some would say for political and sort of social entertainment purposes. So perhaps you can explain that a little bit. And in particular, you mentioned about how the current 14th Dalai Lama, that it's very clearly stated that, the Kalachakra empowerment should only be given at certain times, right? So this is also very interesting. So yeah, maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, see, where in 2019 there was a conference of monks, masters in Dharamsala regarding Kalchakra, and this was chaired by 14th Dalai Lama himself. In that conference, 14th Dalai Lama himself says that the authentic Kalchakra teachings is being carried by Jonang tradition and Bhutan's Bhutan's Salu tradition. So it's his version, and that is there on his website. That is there in all the media releases of CTA. One can just check it. So even 14th Dalai Lama never claimed that he is the only authority on Kalchakra, and rather he gives due credence to the Jonangs and Bhutan. Now, coming to the point that he is being identified as the only Kal Chakra master because of mass empowerment, that to some extent that is because he had done mass empowerment on such a large scale and in such a vast geography that he is being identified with Kal Chakra. So he has already given 34 empowerments, and he has given in Europe, in US, in Australia, across Himalayan belt. He had already given twice in Tibet. Though in Bodh Gaya, and in some of the mass empowerments, almost 1 lakh people have been attending. So that is, and these get lot of mass publicity. Therefore, many of the masters who have been giving Kal Chakra empowerment, and like completion stage is being given by Bokar Monastery, but they are not in media limelight,
Yeah.
because they are giving the empowerment to appropriate disciples after testing the capability of disciples. And Kal Chakra empowerment it's not a simple empowerment, because we know there are 11 layers of empowerment. So what 14th Dalai Lama has been giving, that is the 7 empowerment, for welfare of humanity. So that is the simpler empowerment, but higher empowerments are not public, and these are still being given by great masters, both from Jonang traditions and in other traditions.
Yes, although, the sort of advent, if you like, of the mass, huge amounts of people attending Kala Chakra empowerments or any sort of highest yoga tantra empowerment, Uttara Tantra Shastra empowerment is questionable. So these days, more and more people are questioning the, like you say, is that really in accordance with the tantras and their advice? The 17th Karmapa recently spoke about the Kala Chakra Tantra and what it said about the importance of examining a disciple and the guru, both of them examining each other very, very well. And that even if someone had an empowerment where they entered the same mandala at the same time, should not be taught the Tantra and the Sadhana together, and that they should be taught separately as individuals. So, not these sort of mass group teachings, or even, so there seems to be a lot of degeneration, if you like, of how the Tantra itself talks about how these empowerments and transmissions should be given. And in a way, you sort of kind of pinpoint that a little bit in your book. It does seem to have started in Tibet, the degeneration of not just the Kala Chakra transmission, but the highest yoga tantra transmissions, let's say, with the mass empowerments. And there seems to be a particular turning point with in the 19th century with the Panchen Lama and the Dalai Lamas, with mass empowerments being used almost like a political social entertainment tool, with the Chinese government, obviously helping them with that. I mean, you mentioned the 14th Dalai Lama gives credence to the Jonang and Bhutan as the lineage holders, but even that is not telling 100% of the reality of the history of Kala Chakra, right? Because the history of Kala Chakra, we've just discussed, has a much bigger lineage than that, including, Naropa, the Kagyu, the Karma Kagyu, particularly with the third Karmapa. Yeah. And Nyingma with Mipam. Yeah. And so the fact that the Dalai Lama gives credence, it seems, only really to the Jonang and to Bhutan, again, is kind of missing quite a lot of the picture. And some critics would also say, well, it's kind of ironic that he's giving credence to the Jonang as the kind of lineage holders of Kala Chakra when the Gelugpas with the Mongolians completely crushed the Jonang in Tibet and stole a lot of their monasteries and texts, right? So I think people might find that a little bit kind of, what's the word, disingenuous almost, is that because you're sort of saying the Jonang are the holders, but at the same time you're completely dominating the tradition, right? So some critics might say that. Now, So let's just, if you can, then let's talk briefly about how did it come about the Panchen Lama and the Dalai Lama started to give these huge, massive empowerments of Kala Chakra?
This started in the first half of 20th century.
Mm.
And in fact, 13th Dalai Lama was not very much, supportive of this Kal Chakra Tantra studies. But Panchen Lama, the ninth Panchen Lama, so when he went to first he went to Inner Mongolia, I think, yeah. So when he went to Inner Mongolia, so at that time, these mass empowerments were started, and that had to do with, the whole intra-Mongolian politics, because Outer Mongolia had become a Soviet, in a way, a communist republic, and the Jesun Dampa, Khotapur. So they were, he was deposed, and the Lamas were expelled. So they were coming to Inner Mongolia. So at that time, for the nationalist government, China was already passing through a very tough transition phase, and there was instability. Though nationalist governments, they in fact they supported Panchen Lama, to or like domesticate the Mongols in Inner Mongolia. So at that time, the Kal Chakra initiations were started by Panchen Lama, and that had fullest support of Chinese state. So he had, I think, four public ceremony of Kal Chakra in Inner Mongolia. Thereafter, he even came to Beijing and gave a public ceremony in October 1932 in Forbidden Palace, and then to Hangzhou. So, in a way, he gave 9 public empowerment, but none by 13th Dalai Lama. So, Panchen Lama was being supported by Chinese state, for this Kal Chakra ceremony, so that there is no disturbance in Inner Mongolia. See, because Mongolia had already declared independence in 1912.
Yes. But
So
you also mentioned though that the reason why Panchen Lama had fled Tibet, I mean he literally fled Tibet, right? Was and he was, in a way used in a way, or or he wanted to join forces, let's say, with the Chinese communists as well, was because he had to flee Tibet because he was, the Ganden government, who is now being revealed more and more, were extremely, strict and suppressive, particularly with the other lineages. But and so he had to flee Tibet, and then, as you say, the 13th Dalai Lama wasn't doing that. But so then, how did the 14th Dalai Lama then, and why did it change from being the Panchen Lama and because you mentioned in your book that these events, the Panchen Lama, were huge social events, right? There was like movie stars and powerful people. It was kind of a big social event. You mentioned that, and so in a way, it was also about gathering people and showing power and wealth and money, right? It wasn't, which again is not really in line with what the Kala Chakra Tantra teaches, would you say? I mean, the Kala Chakra Tantra is very specific about how and when to give an empowerment, suitable student, suitable guru, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, let's discuss, how it came into, how the 14th Dalai Lama took over this, but also the timing of the Kala Chakra empowerment, because you do mention that as it should be on the full moon only, yeah?
Yes. It's not I'm mentioning it is given in the text.
Sorry,
As
yes,
well
in
as
the text,
detailed
yeah,
in the commentary Vimal Prabha.
exactly.
So see, 14th Dalai Lama, he was initiated into Kal Chakra by Ling Rinpoche. So in 1954, I think March, and soon thereafter, in May, he conducted a huge public mass empowerment of Kal Chakra in May, And he gave two public empowerment in Tibet before going into exile to India. So what is interesting is that how this Kal Chakra uh, like lineage that came to Lingrin Poche. That even I'm not yet clear, but this is what has happened. Yeah, how and because earlier Kal Chakra, the Panchen Lamas were considered to be the master of Kal Chakra. And except first Dalai Lama, he wrote something on Kal Chakra, some few notes, and then seventh Dalai Lama, he had written, and he also used to give lot of empowerment on Kal Chakra. But apart from that, none of the Dalai Lamas had much to do with Kal Chakra tradition.
Yeah.
But suddenly from Ling Rinpoche, this comes to 14th Dalai Lama, and now in last 60 years almost, he is being
Well,
identified as the greatest Kal Chakra master.
okay, with that, as you said, we'll talk about the full moon timing as well, which, as you said, is in the Vimalaprabha commentary, right? So you're saying this, of course, this is in the text.
No, and even in the text,
Yeah.
it is there in the text, full slope, because it clearly said that the Kal Chakra, the Sand Mandala empowerment. I'm not talking about Kal Chakra higher empowerment.
Yes.
The Sand Mandala empowerment had to be done only on the full moon
Full
of the
moons.
first lunar month of Chaitra. So that falls somehow somewhere around late March and early April.
Yeah, so again, this is a very interesting revelation because obviously you're saying that, that means that the Kala Chakra empowerment as given by the 14th Dalai Lama was not done on the correct time or the correct days, let's say, which again is quite significant. But going back to the Ling Rinpoche lineage, I mean, this is kind of quite news to me in a way because as you know, I'm very interested in Kala Chakra. I've written quite a lot on it, and not just with all the different, the main lineages. What would be Ling Rinpoche's lineage then? Because when you hear when I hear the name Ling Rinpoche, it certainly doesn't strike me as someone who has any real textual legacy or lineage in the Kala Chakra. So how did that come about?
Because even I'm not aware, and I know this thing that 14th Dalai Lama had a lot of respect and veneration for his Guru Ling Rinpoche.
Yeah.
And in fact, when Ling Rinpoche departed, so his body was mummified, and that is being kept in the personal residence of 14th Dalai Lama in Dharamsala. So he had lot of respect for his guru. That means from whom he learned Kal Chakra.
Well, yes, obviously he respects it, but I guess as a scholar, or let's say someone who's a writer on Kala Chakra, the question would be, who did Ling Rinpoche get that transmission from? And obviously, in terms of the textual legacy, as we've been talking about, forget about the practitioner legacy, which is obviously quite clear, I think, in the history of India and Tibet. But the textual legacy certainly, predominantly, certainly within Tibet, the textual legacy is predominantly with the Kagyu, the Nyingma, and the Jonang. In terms of textual, right, textual sources on Kala Chakra. Would you say?
Apart from that, I think we must add Bodong.
Oh, Bhutan, sorry.
One of the greatest Kal Chakra master in terms of writing has been this Bodong Panchen Chokke Namgyal. And he was his period was from 1375 to 1415. He taught Kal Chakra both to first Dalai Lama and first Panchen Lama.
Right.
And when I was going through a list of 112 Kal Chakra texts composed by Tibetan masters, not Indians, so out of those 112, majority belong to Bodong sect, that is 38. And almost all 38 written by this Bodong master, Panchen Chokle Namgyal. And he wrote 1,000 individual texts running into 136 volumes. And I'm lucky to go through his reprinted 136 volumes last year.
Yes, now this is obviously very interesting. I guess because my background is predominantly with the Jonang or the Kagyu in the Kalachakra, is that there's a kind of a paucity or a lack of translation and research on the Jonang sort of canon or the Kagyu canon on Kalachakra, particularly as we were discussing in an email about the Lamyik tradition, which is the tradition of how to get to Shambhala. Now, that is also something that requires, I think, a lot more research, particularly the Jonangs, who, you know, Taranata and people like that, who perhaps have been a bit overlooked in terms of, you know, the emphasis has been very much on Bhutan, as you mentioned, but, you know, there are these other, you know, traditions and lineages, in particular the Jonang, which I think to some extent, you know, certainly in English language scholarship, you know, have been overlooked for quite a long time. But anyway, let's leave the history of Kalachakra there for now. It's been fascinating talking to you about it. And your book is an absolute gem on this topic. And, you know, it's so much rich with material and revelations, and particularly also about Odhyana and Shambhala and Naropa. And so I very much hope we can do a second podcast on that particular topic.
Sure.
But for now, let's finish the interview with, or the discussion, should I say, with sort of plans for the future of Kalachakra in India, and some of your perhaps recent activities about, I mean, about the Buddhist relics. And how do you envision, for example, the Kalachakra continuing and, you know, progressing in India? Do you think there will be a sort of reversion, if you like, to sort of a more pure Indian sort of style transmission and empowerment, which is much closer to the tantras, what they advise about that, you know, going back to its roots, its authenticity like that? How do you envision Kalachakra in the future in India?
Once my book was published, even I didn't expect, you know, the reception which this book has received here in India.
Yes.
And, many scholars, even many spiritual masters, many political figures, they have developed a lot of interest in you know, promoting this work, and rightfully this is the highest fruit of you know, Indic tradition. So I think Kalachakra studies will be picked up in Indian varsities also, and I'm lucky to have discussed on Kalachakra with scholars in Sarnath, St. Institute of Studies, and Nalanda Mahavihar, in Ladakh University, in Jammu University, in Jawaharlal Nehru University, and so there's a lot of you know, interest among both young as well as you know, very senior scholars. So even I have that dream that someday the original, you know, Kalachakra lineage can once again revive back in India, because this is the highest Tantra lineage, and this was the last, you know, grandest text composed in the Nalanda premises. So if government of India and like Indian society, they are working so hard for you know, reviving Nalanda tradition. So I think then the future of Kalachakra study is very bright.
Well, that's great news. And what about the kind of transmission of it, though? Because as I mentioned, the 17 Karmapa was recently teaching on mentioned the Kalachakra Tantra about the whole, you know, the importance of examining a guru and the guru examining a student and the qualifications necessary. And this is all mentioned in the Kalachakra Tantra, and how, you know, he was saying even, you know, if you're in the same mandala and you've had the same empowerment, you should not be taught the sadhana and the tantra together, even if it's your very good dharma friend. So, you know, that was very interesting. And again, I think sort of people really felt that there was even maybe a change there, that within the Tibetan Buddhist world, there is a kind of an acknowledgement maybe coming of a change, you know, in the way highest yoga tantra like Kalachakra should be transmitted. And we see all over the place, online, on Facebook, on social media, all sorts of people saying, I'm going to give this Kala Chakra, Vajrayogini, to people who sign up with no one checking the guru, the guru not having checked them, and signing up and paying their payment. And you know, do you think that's going to, you know, increase more, or do you think, you know, that maybe there is going to be a sort of a reversion back to sort of how it should be done? What's your sort of thinking on that?
No, see, the discussion which we are engaged with right now, the work which you are doing, masters like Khenpo Rinpoche are doing. So this is how even my work can be counted there. So this is how authentic teachings.
Yeah.
Once you know, it come on surface. So naturally, people who are using Kal Chakra only as a marketing gimmick. So I think that can be tamed. But
Yes.
this kind of wisdom is not meant for marketing.
No.
These involve, you know, deepest of our, you know, feelings and
Yes.
highest of knowledge tradition. So these
Yes.
have to be pursued very diligently, very seriously, and
Yes.
you know, with a lot of seclusion and focus. So it cannot
Absolutely.
be, you know, just for promoting a brand. It had to be
Yes.
really serving, you know, wisdom.
Absolutely, yeah. And you know, on that note, I think, you know, maybe we should leave it there. So definitely, of course, all of these practices ultimately are supposed to lead to full awakening with that intention. And with that intention, that's how you should take an empowerment and a transmission. I've even had sometimes people asking me, you know, I want to get a Vajrayogini transmission, where do I go? And you know, it's you have to sort of understand that, you know, those sorts of transmissions, you know, from the Mahasiddhas like Naropa or, you know, Tilopa, you know, they weren't given easily, and sometimes they had to wait years before getting a transmission like Naropa did from Tilopa. And you know, it was not easy, and they were thoroughly examined before. But in any case, as you say, scholars who are writing about these things and talking about these things, it's another way to ensure that authenticity remains in the tradition, right?
Yes.
Anyway, Niraj Kumar, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and I do hope we can do a second podcast on particularly Audhyana and Shambhala. And I wish you all the best with your scholarship, your work on for Buddhism in India, and so on. And yeah, thanks so much again. It's been an honor and a privilege speaking to you. So thank you very much. And
Thank you
namaste.
very much for having me on this platform. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.